Are you in need of a reliable place to print your designs? Look no further than Outreach.com. As a preferred printer partner for over 20,000 churches similar to yours, they've got everything that you need. From postcards to banners or new mover mailers, Outreach.com is here to assist. Reach more with their professional and tailored services. Again, that's Outreach.com. Make your message stand out today.
Welcome to the Church Communications Podcast, powered by Church Visuals. We believe that effective communication is integral to leading your congregation and community. Join Katie Allred and Carl Barnhill each week to dive into insights and strategies that will help you grow your church. Whether you're a pastor, a church leader, or someone interested in maximizing your communication to make a difference, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Church Communications Podcast. I'm Katie Allred, and again, joined here by Carl Barnhill. Carl,
What's up,
how
Katie?
are you doing?
I'm excellent. So I had an eventful morning this morning. So we woke up, I was walking the dog in the neighborhood, and our smoke alarm went off. And usually it's 3 a.m. battery replacement. You know, it always happens at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, 2 or 3 a.m., got to get up. But this morning, not. My wife is getting the kids out of bed because the smoke alarm is going crazy. Ended up being, we did call the fire department just as a precaution, but it ended up being one smoke detector that was faulty that triggered the whole thing that's never happened before. So it's been an eventful morning. So it's only going to get better. Now that Mark's here, it's only going to get better as the day goes on.
It's only going to go uphill from here. I mean, downhill? I don't know. It's only going to go up from here. How about that?
There you go.
Okay,
if you hear smoke detectors going off at my house, I mean, I just want to keep up with you, Carl.
Yeah. Well, if I run out, if you just see me gone, that's where I'm at. I'm going to save the house.
You know, you have that problem with your smoking and all.
All right, boys.
I do. I moved to vaping, so this is going to be a fun interview right here, Katie.
Well,
you started the engine
boys,
now.
Back on topic. Okay, so today I'm excited because we're joined by Mark MacDonald. Mark, he is a friend of ChurchCom, has been a friend of our group and our community, and involved for a long time, and we think the world of him, so we're so glad to have him here. Mark, can you maybe tell the people a little bit about yourself if they're not familiar with you and your work?
Well, thank you for having me on. I think the world of you and this whole church communication world, the more people that I get to know in the church communication world, the more I realize how special everybody is. I mean, they have to juggle so much. But first of all, before we get into that, just to tell you a little bit about me, I guess I'm Canadian, that's where I was born. But 2.5 years ago, became American citizens. And the reason why I bring up Canada was because after college, I started in the ad agency business. Was hired as a designer in a fairly small agency, and then from that, kind of worked my way up through the top of that agency, and then was hired by one of Eastern Canada's largest ad agencies, and then I ended up doing like all the jobs, is like production manager, studio manager, and then designer, art director, creative director, and then ended up as senior creative director for the agency. And the entire time I just kept thinking, so why doesn't the church know this stuff? And this was like way back, probably before you were born, Katie.
No, I don't know. Guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't this a fun game to play with women? Like, when do you think I was born?
I mean, you're in your 20s, right?
No.
See, I played this game well.
Yeah, you're in your 20s, right? I'm like, no, but thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, this was back in the, in the 80s, late 80s, 90s. And I just kept thinking, okay, so the church needs to know this. And I had the opportunity to come to the States, down into North Carolina. And I set up an agency there, started working with churches all across the country, became the national marketing arm for the National Association of Church Business Administration, National Association of Church Facility Managers, National Association of church design builders, and that kind of gave me the national stage, which I'm just this little kid from East Coast Canada, and I really can't believe I get to do what I get to do. So written over 800 magazine articles and a best-selling book on church branding, and then worked for the Florida Baptist Convention for a couple of years. Hey, with their 3,000 Baptist churches here in Florida. That got me to Jacksonville, Florida, and that's where I am now. And I'm running the agency called Be Known for Something.
So you're the right person. Sorry, Carl. I just want to say you're the right person to talk about branding.
He is. He's a master. So let's get into that. Let's get into church branding, visual identity. So talk about maybe your move from seeing this need in the church world to actually moving into church world and starting to explain this to churches. Maybe talk about where they were and kind of their need for solid branding, solid visual identity.
Well, it's interesting because when we first got started, the agency's 23 years old now, and when we first got started, there were very few people even talking about branding or promotions. Anytime that I talked to a church, it was pretty much, well, we have a bulletin, and it was like, yes, someday I'm going to probably rant about how that bulletin needs to be killed. But right now, like at the very start of it all, it just seemed like the church just figured we don't need branding, we don't need marketing, we don't need any communications because we're the church, and right. People really relied heavily on the church. And as you both know, that has definitely changed.
Yeah.
And when it, speaking of changes, we got inundated as soon as the internet came along. Wow, that made me sound really old. Back in the day,
the Google.
That's right. When the internet came along, we had so much noise, so much information that was being pushed towards us, to the point where, we ended up not only battling the perception of what church is and how people don't rely so heavily on it, but we also battle that noise. And in order to be able to survive in this world, we just can't take it all in. Obviously, you, Katie, have read the entire internet.
From beginning to end.
Exactly. There's no way that anyone can keep up with all the information that's out there. So we all have to choose, okay, so what am I going to listen to? What am I not going to listen to? And sadly, the church got put onto the peg of, you know what? I don't need the church. I don't need to listen to the church. And that's why we just have to make sure that the church has the ability to set the message up so that it'll actually be received properly. And then when we talk about received properly, we have to make sure that we throw into the mix not only the perception and the noise, but we also have incredibly low attention spans just because of how much we're interrupted. We hold on to our phone and we're interrupted constantly. We flip to one app to another app. So that attention span, as it gets smaller and smaller, we have to, as a church, figure out how do we say something quickly and obviously so that someone says, oh, wow, maybe I should pay attention to that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think I'm wondering about what you feel like are maybe the key elements to consider when you're developing a church brand or a visual identity that really authentically represents the church's missions, their values, their personality.
It's a good question, and I know that you know that answer. But yeah, you've been around.
Everybody's different. Everybody has a different swing to these things, and I think I want to hear yours.
That's right. And so I don't know whether you can actually see behind me, but it says discover your thread. That thread, that the concept of a thread is so critical. And a lot of people go, brand, yeah, look at my logo. And that's not your brand.
Yeah.
What you're known for is your brand. And so if you have a lot of sameness in a category, so if you have same church, same church, same church, same church, all lined up on one street, and someone has to stand across the street from all of those churches and make a decision,
Yeah.
which church am I going to go to? You have to position yourself differently, because when you have a lot of sameness, people have a hard time making a decision. So brand positioning, what we've called the thread, that thread has to be strung through everything that you do, so you become known for something that someone would say, oh yeah, there's all those churches, but I want to choose that one.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that a lot of people say, you know what, but all of our churches in our community are not lined up on one street. And I correct them and say, no, you are all lined up on one street, and it's called Google Street. And when people are Googling, they get a page of church, 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 church. And oftentimes we rely heavily on Google to tell us which one's the best church, which is not always the best church.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is that there's often, I think, just a different, before, back in the day, churches were really known for their denominational nomenclature. That's really just not the case anymore, right? Like that was your differentiator for a long time. It was your brand for a long time, I think, until the late 80s, early 90s. And then churches really started thinking about it. Saddleback was maybe the first church that really did branding, and that was in the late 70s, early 80s, and took away actually their denominational nomenclature. They didn't, associate necessarily with this. They did, but they didn't. And they took it away and became a community church.
Now they really don't.
Instead, now they really don't. But
was taken away from them, I think. Now
bad example. Keep moving.
Yeah. No, it's still a good example.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, we love Saddleback, we love the SBC, we love all the people. But anyway, so I think what they did there though was a really smart move at that time, because they said, hey, people don't necessarily associate with the Baptist Church really well in California, but the word community they do associate really well with, and so we're going to be a community church, and that really worked for them. They eventually just dropped the whole thing. It's just Saddleback now, but I think it's interesting how that worked out for them.
Well, and it's interesting because oftentimes, like, I was raised in the church. I mean, my family had the magical ability to know when the front doors of our church were unlocked, because the MacDonald plan was put into a car and we were on our way. Like we were there all the time, and we relied heavily on the church. COVID has actually, created a realization of how little even the people who are currently attending church, they don't rely on it as heavily as what we always thought, was the case. As those attendance numbers have dropped, I think that most of the the people who are surveying the church, they're now saying the regular attenders of church is once a month, which is like, okay, whoa. I mean, we were like 4 or 5 times a week that we would go to church. And now, again, because of all the additional noise, the additional, ways to fill our time, it's awfully hard to say that the church will have first place. And that's just a realization that we all have to come to. And we have to make sure that you're known for something that someone would say, wow, if that wasn't here, I would miss it if it was gone. And most churches are just known for being a church, which means you really don't have a brand.
Katie mentioned Saddleback. Is there other examples of churches that are really doing it well, or maybe churches that you've worked with that have really changed their branding to stand out more?
Yeah, and that's always a really tough question for me because I think that I would like to say all of my churches that I've worked with are just doing it amazingly. Well, we when we work with the church, we turn everything over to them because we want to empower them to be able to run with it. I don't want anyone to have to rely on me. So anytime that I ever say, yeah, a client of ours, I always say, now remember that they have taken it and run with it. They probably have run with it a little bit different than what I would suggest. However, most times people say, yeah, all those big churches, they do it really well. And maybe we're going to get in. Exactly. We're going to get into a little bit of a spat there because oftentimes those big churches aren't known for anything other than being a big church, or they're known for their celebrity pastor. And I know that every pastor just bristles at the idea of being a celebrity pastor. They all say, "Oh, I'm not a celebrity." But if you don't control another message, then the pastor becomes the number one selling point for the church. And if they are blessed with an incredible teaching pastor, that's all a good thing. You become known for that. But what happens if moral failure happens, or if death happens, or if they move on? All of a sudden the church is floundering because it's like they have to try to find their own way. And that's a really tough thing.
Your identity should exist outside of your pastor. That's for sure.
Your identity has to be outside of your pastor. And what oftentimes happens, we'll get a call from a church and they'll say, well, we're kind of thinking we'd like to brand, but we're in between pastors right now. So should we wait until we get a new pastor in order to brand? And I would strongly caution every church to not wait for getting a pastor, because your brand shouldn't be based upon your pastor. Your brand has to be based upon your audience. And that audience, your internal audience, your congregation, or your external audience, the community. I mean, your growth potential comes from the community. So I say build your brand based upon your external audience, your community, and make sure that it aligns really well with your vision, mission, and values from your internal. But if your community is not going to change drastically, but your pastor probably will. And instead of finding a pastor who likes to talk about something, find out what your community needs, and then find a pastor who likes to talk about it.
Hi, it's Katie Allred, and I want to tell you a little bit more about churchcompro.com. ChurchCom Pro, we are really excited about this membership offering because it's going to be different from anything that we've done before. We're excited to professionalize the industry, to give back to this community that has given us so much. And so the membership, it includes courses on church communications, my foundational course on church communications that goes along with my book. Through that course, you will create a communications plan. You will create a crisis communications plan. You'll create a social media plan. We will walk you step by step on how to do that, how to audit your communications and how to audit your website and how to build a website step by step. But then what's really cool is we also have other courses, like that we have a Chat GPT mastery courses for churches, as well as certification, and we are planning so many more. I'm really excited, and I hope that you will join us. It's going to be $29 a month, so less than $1 a day, so that you can learn more and grow with us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Earlier, you talked about how there are some churches that you've worked with that don't necessarily follow what you would have done. And so this is why I have this question of how can churches ensure that their branding is consistent across all their channels, whether it's print or website or social media? How can they work to ensure that consistency across all of those, even though they're very different mediums?
Yes. And everyone in the church world, no, everyone in the world likes to do what's right in their own eyes. And there could be like a Bible written about that. And and the thing is that the Bible created a standard so that people weren't doing what was right in their own eyes. Instead, they had a moral standard. The interesting thing is that when you create a brand, that thread, which is 3 to 5 words, really simple, easy to use, and integrates with everything that you do. As soon as you create that brand, you want to put a visual wrapper around it. And because we're in a visual world, so you want to have your logo, your color palette, your font palette, and then probably some graphic standards of just, is there a pattern that we typically use, or the type of photos, and like all of those things. We call that your brand fences. So it's like you put some fences around it to say, okay, so instead of doing what is right in your own eyes, every ministry of the church has to fall in line and work within the fences. You can be really creative within those fences, but what I've oftentimes found is if you don't have the fences, people are going to be all over the map. And you just have to kind of create a tool so that people, they have something that says, okay, if we're going to use a font, we'll use the church's font. If we're going to use a color, we're going to, like if you have, red, white, and blue as your 3 colors for your church, the patriotic church. But if you're going to have, like, if you have your particular blue, like we do at Be Known for Something, we don't choose another blue. Like, we just go with the blue that is locked down in our fences. So,
Right.
And what that does is it actually helps make a bunch of decisions a whole lot easier. A lot of people say that's so restrictive, and there's a whole other Bible written about that. And I mean, that restriction actually is for your good, because what it does is it helps you, realize that you're known for a visual look, and that look needs to be controlled. If you're not controlling anything, you really don't have a brand.
You mentioned churches being with you. Give me, if I'm a church that wants to do a rebrand or a ministry, give me some good first steps. What should I be thinking about? Obviously, you would be a great person to go to for that, but maybe walk through just some first steps in revamping or rebranding my church or ministry.
Well, a lot has to do with who is the who that's listing. So, if you're a communications person, and Katie, you know about this. I mean, there are so many different layers of communications people. And it used to be that the communications person was that person who did the bulletin, which was typically a secretary or a ministry assistant.
Yep.
As the role has played, into something much greater, the person who does the ministry assistant who did the bulletin, hey, there's websites. Do you know how to do websites? And that person goes, I'm going to lose my job if I don't. So yes, I know how to do a website. What about social media? Yes, I do. And this whole SEO stuff, is that? And it's like, yes. And then it's an overwhelmed person. And a ministry assistant thinks differently than what I believe a communications director needs to have. So a ministry assistant tries to keep everyone happy and does what is told. Here's the things you need to do. So they just say, yes, I will do it the best that I can. Where a director of communication really needs to start thinking like a leader and has the ability to say no to a pastor above them. That's like a whole other podcast that we could do. But I guess to answer your question, because I felt like I just talked around it, I realize that it's going to take a whole lot longer than you'd ever expect.
Yeah.
Build on research, not on guesses. because oftentimes what we found is that when we go into a church, they're like, we don't need to do a research project of demographics, or we don't need to figure out who those people are. We know those people. And almost always those guesses are incorrect. And then I would say, number three, do it professionally. I mean, your entire church becomes known for this foundation. If you do it improperly, you've set up your church. The wise man built his house upon the rock. Like the rock is research, like so that people will actually. They can't say, I don't know whether that's right or not. No, good research is going to be right, and it's something to build everything on. And then I would also, just to jump back into, start with a brand positioning, start with your thread. What do you want to be known for before you ever do visual? And then that actually helps set up, the emotion and the feel behind what your church should actually look like. And then you put that visual wrapper that matches the thread onto it.
So move into visuals. So when it relates to our fences, or when it relates to church communications in general, why do your visuals matter? Why do the your visual identity? Why do your visuals matter when it comes to church communications?
Oh my goodness! So we have to, and I know that this is going to sound a little bit bristly, but we have to compete with everything else that's around us. And so the standard in the world today is extremely high. Like it used to be that we could get away with awful clip art and people would go, that's the coolest thing ever. And now
you're telling me it's not?
I mean, with AI,
some clip art on this episode.
Yeah, and with AI is raising the standard as well. I mean, if you go to any of the ones that, even Photoshop now has the ability to, to fill in the blanks with some type of a visual, and it's fairly good quality visual. So drive through your community, look at what the signs, the visuals, the logos, all of the things around your church, what quality they are, and you better be a better, higher standard, because we're called to a higher standard. When we follow Christ, it's don't give in to mediocrity. That's not what Jesus wants to be known for. I mean, he is the best product that we ever have that we want to promote. So here we are, like, just make sure your visuals matter because Jesus matters. And if you look subpar, people will just assume that everything that you're doing is subpar as well.
But you don't understand, Mark. I don't have the budget for to spend on that kind of stuff. We have a great volunteer over here, or somebody that's been here for 20 years, that they can do just to find a job.
Yes, should we start praying for Carl, Katie?
I think we should just start praying for Carl. I think we should surround him with a hedge of prayer.
No, I say it in jest, but why is it worth spending the money on quality visuals and quality visual identity?
Because it really, truly is the foundation of, people will look and see the visual quickly. And if it's just not up to snuff, it will be ignored, and you'll end up having church like reinforcing the message that it really doesn't matter. So if you're going to invest anything in and we work with a lot of churches, and we try as best as possible to work with budgets. And I realize that sometimes people just don't have that.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna set up the foundation for what you look like and what you're going to be known for, just invest as much money as you possibly can. Be careful of those. There's lots of websites that offer really cheap branding, and there's always those people that say, hey, my child who's in 7th grade can do that. Just be very, very careful of all of that.
That's fun.
Just do. Yeah, exactly. We could
I was like, oh,
probably.
that's fun. I'm glad your 15-year-old can do it. I mean, they could. I don't know. It's funny. I created a brand for a company when I was 13 for a construction company. My dad actually found this guy, and he was like saying he needed a logo for his construction company, and he was like, my daughter can do it. He didn't tell him that I was a 13-year-old. Anyways, and this was back in 2003 though, and I was only communicating over email, and somehow I got away with it, and they still use that logo today. And it was made in like Photoshop, so it wasn't made correctly, right? Like it should have been made in like Illustrator. I didn't know any of that stuff, but that's the problem with hiring a youngin is they'll do it. It might look good, but it may not be correct for like growing exactly.
And Carl, in post production, we can add that logo in, right?
We can fix everything. Everything.
Okay. Oh, my logo for my construction company. Would you like to add that?
Everything can be fixed.
We should call it up right now, Carl, and talk about it.
I don't know if you can find it on the internet, but I'll try. I'll try to find it for you. So.
Well, and what's interesting is, I mean, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade when I started to design logos. People would say, "Wow, so you can do a logo?" And it's like, yes. And I remember like pouring blood, sweat, and tears over trying to figure out how do you create a visual that represents the whole? And oftentimes a brand can't be prose; it needs to be poetry. So usually, the younger you are, the more details you add to the logo. So when we look at a lot of logos, it's a good start. It's probably our first round, and then we're just constantly thinking, so how do we simplify that so that it becomes something that is still unique, because that's really important, but it also has to be something that's memorable, that can be used as small as the top of a website, on the header, like all of those things. Back when we first started doing, design work, we didn't have to worry. The business card was always the smallest thing.
A circular logo was fine. Now a circular logo is kind of hard to work with in a lot of circumstances. I mean, unless it's just like that stamp. If it's more than that, I don't know. It gets kind of tricky in some certain.
I totally agree, and I think that every logo, if it's not horizontal, it needs to have a horizontal versioning of it so that it can be used in a header. And those in the website headers, they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller at the top, mainly because most people don't rely heavily on what's in the header, other than just looking for the logo in the upper left hand corner and then flipping over and seeing what the main menu is.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so Mark, the last thing as we wrap up is, if people want to connect with you, if they want to find you on the internet, how can they do that?
Wow. So Google Mark MacDonald, MacDonald. But beknownforsomething.com is probably the best place to find out everything about what we do. And you can look under the leadership page, and that tells you a little bit more about me. But I'm on pretty much all the social mediums. I mean, as we're recording this, Threads has just come out. So I'm even on Threads. I
know. Yeah, it's fun over there. It's the Wild West. It's where social media is fun again, is when there's a new platform. And it's only fun for like, I don't know, a couple weeks, and then you're like, well, now it's like every other platform, but it's fun to begin with. So
I'm over it already. So
I know, yeah, with all the notifications that you keep getting, you're like, I'm done. We can pause this for
exactly. So most of those social media networks are either under Mark MacDonald or Be Known for Something or Mark Mac 1023.
So send him a thread on Threads immediately, because that's where he's going to connect with you the most.
Because it's the only one that still has notifications on.
That's true. But we don't know if it will still in September or October when this podcast comes out. But we'll find out. Like, send them a thread and see if they're still on.
Yeah, people be listening, and they'll be like, "Oh, that's right. That lasted for like 3 weeks. I remember Thread."
That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, Thread. Mark talked a lot about discovering your thread. He must work for Meta. No.
Yeah. Are you sure?
Yeah, I don't.
Well, okay. All right. We'll think about
that. Nice. Everyone needs to discover their thread, and you can do that on Threads by following me. How's that?
Oh, that was good.
That was
Excellent. I love
woven
that.
together very well, Mark. Very good job.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Carl, as always, your pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and listening to the podcast today. I hope you learned something about branding, visual identity, and how you can use that and get better at your church. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for the Church Communications Podcast. To learn more and get more resources for your church, visit churchcommunications.com.